Xi Jinping has called Vladimir Putin his best friend. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, the two met in Beijing and formed a no-limit partnership. However, Putin's war has suffered a serious setback. After the Ukrainian military and civilians showcased a strong resistance, the Russian army is losing momentum, and the chief of the Russian army's general staff is rumored to have been replaced. Meanwhile, international sanctions and anti-war outcry inside and outside Russia are escalating. What does this mean to Xi Jinping and his plan of a possible martial unification with Taiwan? Hello, welcome to my show. I'm Lei. Happy Saturday. Xi Jinping made a gamble that Putin would win the war within a matter of days. That's why Beijing didn't evacuate its citizens from Ukraine before the war. Instead, they told them to hand the Chinese flag to protect themselves. It was a disaster for Chinese nationals as the Ukrainians were upset with the anti-Ukraine comments Chinese trolls launched on the internet. In the early days of the war, the CCP pushed a today's Ukraine, tomorrow's Taiwan and pro-Russia, anti-West narrative. It quickly discovered that this propaganda is self-deprecating. The war didn't turn out the way Xi or Putin had anticipated. The war has given the CCP a brutal reality check on its capability of taking Taiwan by force. The first reality check that shook the CCP leadership is Russia's military strength. This is important to the CCP because the Chinese People's Liberation Army, or PLA, imports the most weaponry from Russia. The war in Ukraine showed that Russian military supremacy is likely overrated. Russian Defense Minister claimed in August 2021 that the Russian military is entering the ranks of the most advanced and technologically developed military in the world. But the war has made the Chinese leader question Chinese military capabilities, which have heavily relied on Russian military technology. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian military has fought in a number of wars. From the Chechen War, Russian-Georgian War, to the seizure of Crimea and the military intervention in Syria. It has much more war experiences than the Chinese PLA, which hasn't fought since the Sino-Vietnam War in 1979. Moreover, Ukraine is an inland country while Taiwan is an island. Russian tanks rode into Ukraine, but it will be much more difficult for China to attack Taiwan across a 100-mile or 160-kilometer strait. Aside from the geographical disadvantages and lack of experience, the Chinese PLA suffers from the same problems haunting the Russian troops, and it can be much worse than the Russians.
Сломались, пацаны. Сломались. Можно оттащить на Россию обратно. А вы хоть знаете, куда вы едете? Куда?
The poor logistics and low morale of the Russian soldiers in Ukraine alarm the CCP leadership, as they know they have the same issues within the PLA due to corruption and anti-war sentiments. In short, the Russia-Ukraine war has given Beijing a wake-up call regarding its military capabilities in taking over Taiwan. And another reality check that shocked Beijing is the international community's solidarity in supporting Ukraine. Before the war, there were differences and divisions among Western nations. Putin and Beijing gambled on the divisions and believed that if the war could be won quickly, the West will compromise with Russia in the face of a fait accompli. In the first 3 days of the war, the Democratic camp was divided and argued as Putin expected. For example, Germany and Italy didn't want to kick Russia out of SWIFT. But Ukrainians' tenacity in defending their country inspired people and quickly bridged this divide. Ukraine's resistance to Russia prompted nations to become more united than ever. The European nation announced plans to take unprecedented action to provide funds to buy weapons for Ukraine. Italy joined the EU in the sanctions. Germany, which had pursued a policy of not sending weapons to conflict zones, began to supply weapons to Ukraine. Even Kazakhstan, one of Russia's closest allies, refused to send troops to assist Russia or recognize the two self-declared separatist republics in the eastern Ukraine. People in Ukraine weren't thoroughly prepared, but they put up an intense fight. People in Taiwan, by comparison, have been living in the shadow of the CCP's threat for years. Their preparedness for war is much higher. From the Taiwanese government to its people, they learn from the Ukrainian experience and will be more prepared. With substantial financial support from the international community, Ukraine offers Russian soldiers a full amnesty and a reward of 5 million rubles, or about $45,000, if they lay down their weapon and surrender. The person most worried about this is probably not Putin, but Xi Jinping. Xi and his military leaders are fully aware that in the face of tens of thousands of dollars, a big majority of Chinese military personnel would defect. The other thing that the CCP leaders are shaken about is that the scale of the financial sanctions resulted in Russia's isolation, and the sanctions targeting individuals in Putin's decision-making team, including some business people. Switzerland abandoned its neutrality and joined the EU in freezing Russian assets, including the assets of 367 individuals. The number of Chinese officials holding money in a Swiss account are in the thousands. According to Swiss National Bank data, Russian companies and individuals held about $11 billion in Switzerland in 2020. How much money do Chinese companies, officials, and individuals hold in their Swiss accounts? The number can be dozens of times higher. The CCP officials' concern for their private assets will form a strong internal opposition to military aggression against Taiwan. This would be a big factor of instability within the CCP. The top brass in Zhongnanhai has realized that tying themselves to the Russian chariot is risky business. So after a couple of days, Beijing waved an olive branch to the United States. On February 28th, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said at an event that the door to Sino-US relations shouldn't be closed. On March 1st, the party mouthpiece, Guangming Daily, published a front-page article titled, "The win-win trend of Sino-US relations is irreversible." It expressed the desire to discard differences, seek common ground, and return the U.S. China relations onto a pragmatic and rational track. Concurrently, on February 28th, the Russian embassy in Beijing shared the February 25th phone call details between Putin and Xi in its official WeChat account. The Russian embassy released two key points that the Chinese did not. The first is Xi Jinping's statement that he respects the actions taken by the Russian leadership in the current crisis. The second is that the two leaders assessed the current international situation and reaffirmed their willingness to continue their close cooperation and mutual support. The Russian embassy noted that the two leaders do not allow any individual country to use illegal sanctions to achieve self-serving interests. Releasing the details of their talk by Putin was to tell the world that the invasion of Ukraine was the result of complicity with or support from Beijing. It was also to remind the CCP that it needs to continue to support Russia as it has promised. Putin does not want Beijing to get off the bandwagon. In a flash, we're in the third month of the year. A Chinese social media user summarized 2022 so far as being marked by a chained woman in China who claimed that the world has discarded her, and a man in Russia who wants to chain and discard the world. The chained woman's story has new developments, and more cases of such atrocities are being uncovered in China. The story can become the event that brings down the Chinese Communist regime if there's enough pressure from the outside world. But right now, the world is preoccupied with Putin's war. I made a video on how we could have prevented the Russian-Ukraine war. It's called, "Is Putin Trapped?" The other video is about how corrupt the Chinese military is. Please check them out. That's all for today. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.